Okay, thank you for joining. So today we've come to our last tutorial for the data preparation and quality unit. So in today's session, we're going to look into understanding what are the quality risks that can be inherited in data and how to mitigate or solve these issues. So what we're going to cover on our indicative content, we now know that everything is data-driven, data-centric, and by having a poor data quality, this can now lead to incorrect conclusion. So we need to have the ability to process process data which are reliable, and this doesn't have to lead to any sort of error. So our documentation is going to outline the key data quality risks, and is also going to provide strategies to mitigate and solve these type of issues. So what do we mean by key data quality risks? We're now going to classify all those type of data that are not accurate. So these will now going to contain any sort of error, which could be not a true representation of our real world entity. Also, we could have incomplete data where maybe some values, some character might be missing, and this will now lead to incomplete data. Also, we do have inconsistent data, which we're now referring to data that is not uniform across different sources. So what we'd see on one data set might not be matching another one. And what are the impact? This will now lead to confusion and a lot of error in data interpretation. Also, we have duplicate data where we have a redundant accuracy of data. So these values have now been entered twicely. Outdated data. So this, we're now referring to data that is no longer needed for our data set. Incorrectly formatted data. So for instance, we've entered string characters instead of integer numbers. So this could be an example of incorrect formatting data. Data integration issues, where we're now looking at problem that will now arise when we're now combining data from different sources. So when it comes to data mitigation and resolution strategies, it is really important that we're able to validate and clean our data. So this process is we're now simply going to ensure that all the data that we've entered are now accurate and consistent before being analyzed. The techniques that will now involve are going to be validation rules, where we now have certain rules in place to validate our data. So for example, an example validation could be on our bank card when we have 16-digit code. So if we do not reach the amount length of numbers, this could be flagged as an error. Cleaning tools. So we can now have software that allows us to clean the data. So we can look at Python with its libraries such as Pandas or Excel. And this allows us to detect and correct any sort of error. Regular auditing. We're now going to conduct regular data auditing to identify correct and incorrect inaccuracies. So here we have an example of data validation by simply working with Pandas library, where we're now going to validate and clean our data. Data standardization, where we're simply going to ensure that our data now follows a consistent format and structure across different source data sets. Techniques that are now required are going to be standard format and common taxonomies. Here is an example code of how data standardization has to be done with SQL. Data duplication. We're now going to identify and remove duplicate records to ensure data integrity. Techniques that will now be involved for this process are going to be duplication tools and unique identifiers. Here's an example of code. Data updating, where we're going to ensure that data is correct, and also is reflect the most recent information. Techniques required are going to be regular updates and real-time data integration. Here's an example code for it using SQL. So here we have a table summary of what we've covered so far regarding our data quality risks. So we have to ensure that we have data quality whenever we looking to have reliable and effective data analysis. Learning outcome one, we're now going to explain the importance of clean data and the potential for data quality issues, which is now going to be costly. So we now have to understand that clean data is very important for each organization across any industry, and this has to be as accurate as possible and has to be complete and consistent. So we need to understand that the importance of clean data cannot be overstated, as it is now going to directly influence the quality of decision making and operational efficiency. So here are some of the key concepts that we need to understand, that we need to follow when we cleaning data. We need to have reliable decision making, where when cleaning data, we need to ensure that business decisions are based on accurate and relevant information. Operational efficiency, where with clean data, we're now going to reduce the need for extensive data cleaning and preparation, which is now going to save on time and costs. Also, this will benefit customer satisfaction, where we clean data will now help maintaining accurate customer records, and this will now improve our customer interaction and satisfaction. It is really important also for regulatory compliance, where we're now going to ensure that organization will now meet regulatory requirements, reducing the risks of non-compliance penalties. Dirty data is less valuable and also cost effective, and every company tend to avoid dealing with this. And as we can see on the other hand, we're now referring to inaccurate and incomplete data formatting. So there are various amount of negative impact that comes from having dirty data. So you can now look at them, such as the time which is now spent correcting quality. So by now fixing this issue, we now spend a lot of time, a lot of company time, and this will now result in a very cost-effective issue. So we have an example here where if data scientists spend 50% of the time cleaning data, this will now reduce the effective analysis time by half, and you now lead to delayed project and reduced productivity. Also, we need to look into lost opportunity and inability to produce data analysis, where with this kind of issue, we now lead to missed opportunity due to inability to perform timely and accurate analysis. So we can now see that, for example, a company which is unable to analyze customer feedback data. This can be due to inconsistency, and they will now even affect the insight results that they're having. Also, you now affect reduced analysis, reduced accuracy of analysis, where what we've now analyzed is not reliable. So, example, with an inaccurate sales forecast due to dirty data, this can now result in overproduction or stock out, which both of them can be really costly. Also, it is important to be monitoring and measuring quality data, where we have to have the ability to ensure that data quality, organization must continuously monitor and measure the data. Now we're looking into data quality metrics, where there are some key topics that we need to take in consideration, such as accuracy, completeness, consistency, and timeliness. When it comes to regular data audits, we're now going to conduct regular audit, which helps identifying or rectifying data quality issues. So, for example, monthly audits of customer databases can ensure that the records are accurate and up to date, which will now reduce the risk of communication error and also enhancing our customer satisfaction. So, as you can see, clean data is now essential, not only for analysis, but also in various aspects of our management. and also relates to our customer satisfaction. When we're looking into how this relates to other department or other department in the company, we can now see how dirty data can also affect the finance, where with dirty data and finance records, this can now lead to misreporting, regulatory penalties, and poor financial decisions. This can also affect human resource, where with dirty data can now result in payrolls errors, compliance issues, and employee dissatisfaction. Here is a summary table of what we've covered regarding our dirty data and how and the positive side of clean data. So to conclude, we can now say that clean data, it is a very important asset that drives reliable decision making, operational efficiency, and customer satisfaction. Now I'm going to explain how different type of data quality errors can occur. So when it comes to data accuracy, data accuracy will now cause inaccurate data, where with manual systematical data entry error, this is now going to have a corrective action, where we have to now have a correction of errors or removal of erroneous records. Also, we have data appropriateness, which causes of inappropriate data. So when we have unavailability of correct measures or difficulty, which is measuring the right values, corrective actions. So now we have to have the ability of understanding the causes of these errors and implementing corrective action, which is now important in maintaining high data quality. So we need to have data accuracy, where this will now refer to correctness of data values, ensuring they truly represent the real world entities which they are intended to describe. Manual data entry errors, such as typos and misspellings. Human error during data entry can lead to typos or misspelling. Incorrect values, where we have data entry personnel which might enter incorrect values due to misunderstanding or carelessness. Also, we have systematic data entry error, where with faulty data entry system, this is now going to lead to a poor decision or bugs which can systematically produce incorrect data. Also, we have to take consideration of data mitigation error, which can now occur during data mitigation processes. Data validation, where we're simply going to implement validation rules to check our data accuracy. Data audits, we're going to regularly audit the data, identify and correct errors. Automated correction tools, which are going to use tools that can automatically detect and correct common errors. Removal of erroneous records. So these are now have outlier detection, which allows us to identify and remove records that significantly deviate from expected patterns. Error reporting, where we're going to establish a system for reporting and reviewing erroneous records to identify on removal and correction. Here's an example of how the code will be now implemented. Data appropriateness, well, this simply going to refer to the suitability of data for particular purposes, ensuring that data measures the right variables relevant to our analysis. So what could be the causes of this inappropriate data? Unavailability of correct measures, difficulty on measuring the right value, proxy measures. So the corrective actions for them are now evaluating suitability of using pseudo measures, such as alternative data sources, proxy validation. When it comes to data collection and improvement, we're now looking into enhanced data collection methods and training on standards, where we're now going to train data collectors and standardize data collections processes to improve our accuracies. So here's the code that will now be implemented. So to summarize, we've now looked into our aspect, such as data accuracy, and we now look into what these errors are caused by, and also looked into the corrective action to fix our errors. So to conclude, we can now say that maintaining high data quality is essential for effective data analysis and decision making. We're now looking into our merit activity, where we now look into analyzing the action to correct data quality issues and also the associated costs. So as you can see from this document, is going to analyze the action required to correct data quality issues. We're now also going to be focusing on data reliability and discuss the associated cost of these actions. When it comes to data reliability, we're now referring to the consistency and dependency of data over time across different sources. So we can now see that data should be free from contradiction and aligned with authoritative and alternative sources. What are going to be the cause of unreliable data? This could be contradiction with authoritative sources, inconsistency with alternative sources. How do we correct this? We're now going to choose any sort of alternative sources where, for example, when data from an initial source is found to be unreliable, we now have to switch to an alternative, which is going to be more reliable than the initial one. Also, the cost, this action might now involve additional cost related to acquiring access to new data sources. Here's an example of our Python code. When it comes to correcting systematic discrepancies, the action that we are now required to do, we now have to identify and correct our systematic discrepancies in the data, which we now have to align it with authoritative sources. So the cost involved are going to be actions which involves time and resources spent on data analysis to identify discrepancies, developing correction algorithms, and verifying the correctness. Example of our pseudocode where we're going to identify our discrepancies. And for example, here we're going to correct in the salary discrepancies. And also we're going to verify the use of corrected data for analysis. So we now look into the cost associated with corrective action. Now I'm going to be choosing alternative sources. So we now have to look at data acquisition costs, integration costs, and training costs. Correcting for systematic discrepancies, we're now going to analyze and correcting cost. We now look into the tools cost, so investing in software tools for data correction and validation, and also personnel cost. Here is a summary table of what we've covered. So to conclude, correcting data quality issues is essential for ensuring data reliability, which in turn supports accurate and effective decision making. Our distinction task, we're now going to justify the cost of maintaining outgoing data quality, monitoring and remediation in the enterprises. So as you can see, maintaining high data quality is an ongoing process that requires continuous monitoring and remediation. While this entails cost, the benefit of reliable, accurate, and timely data from outweigh these expenses. So this document is going to justify the cost of maintaining outgoing data, quality monitoring, and remediation by addressing issues related to data timelessness. So what do we mean by data timeliness. This will now refer to the availability of up-to-date information with the required time frame for effective decision making. So the issues with old and stale data sets are now going to be relevance, where with old and stale data, this can now quickly become irrelevant, and this will now lead to decision based on outdated information. So example, using outdated customer data for marketing campaign can lead to targeting the wrong audience. Accuracy, data that is not regularly updated might no longer accurately refer to current conditions or states. So for example, relying on outdated inventory data can result in stock out or overstocking, which both are very costly for the organization. Compliance, work with many industry which have regulatory requirements for data timelessness. So example for this, we now have financial institutions which must maintain accurate and timely transaction record to comply with any anti-money laundering regulation. Corrective actions for these, we're now going to look at regular data audit, where conducting data audit will now help to assess the appropriateness of data. When it comes to cost effective, with the regular audit, these require resources, including personal time and auditing tools. Here's an example of our Python code for regular audit. Data governance. We're now going to implement robust data governance policies to ensure that our data is consistently evaluated for appropriateness. The costs that are going to involve when developing and ensuring data governance policies, this will now involve initial setup costs and ongoing enforcement costs. Also, it is important on seeking newer versions, where we now have to look into automated data refresh, where we're now going to be setting up automated process to refresh data at regular intervals to ensure that we have data which remains correct. Costs that are involved in this process are now referring to the implementation of automated data refresh process, which will now involve a very high initial setup costs. Here's our SQL code. Also, we have to look into data vendor subscription. So when it comes to external data, we now have to be maintaining subscription with reliable data vendors to ensure we have access to our latest data sets. So when we're looking into the terms of cost, the subscription to data vendors will now incur a recurring cost, which could be monthly bill or annually bill. So justification of the cost, this type of investment can enhance the decision making, where we know the primary benefit of maintaining high data quality is to improve our decision making. Cost saving. So while there are costs associated with ongoing data quality monitoring and remediation, these are often offset by saving from avoiding the consequences of poor data quality. Regulatory compliance. So we're now ensuring that timeliness and accuracy is essential for compliance and industry regulation. Customer satisfaction, where up-to-date and accurate customer data can now improve our overall customer interaction and satisfaction. And operational efficiency, where automating quality process will now reduce the time and effort required for manual updates. Here is a summary table of the aspect that we've covered. We looked into the issue and the correct actions to solve the issues. So to conclude, we can now say that investing in ongoing data quality monitoring and remediation is very important for maintaining the reliability, accuracy, and timelessness of data within our companies. So this was everything for our learning outcome 3. Is there any question for me?
Thanks, Victor. No, that's all very clear. Thank you. Yeah, no, all familiar stuff. Thank you.
Okay, so if there's no other question, we can now join our assignment discussion link. And I'll see that.
Okay, brilliant. See you there.
Bye.
Bye.